part of our celebrations of Clan MacGregor this month, I'm delighted to welcome Bruce MacGregor, a man with a multitude of talents, owner of wedding festival venue Bogbain Farm, inspiration behind craft beer business MacGregor Bars, super talented fiddler and a member of Blazin Fiddles, as well as being a BBC Radio Scotland presenter. So without further ado, let's get into some questions and find out more. So shall we start at the beginning and hear a bit about where you come from, your MacGregor roots and your home in Inverness?
Yeah, sure. Born in 1970 in Inverness to Brian MacGregor, who he's had a business here in Inverness since the late 60s, actually. And in fact, his first garage where he started selling cars is where our present-day MacGregor's bar is. You would never have believed that cars would have been sold from there. You know, it's so small, but I think when you remember how small cars were in those days, it makes sense. But, that was born and brought up here in Inverness. Went to the Inverness Royal Academy, and then moved down south to Edinburgh University at the end of the 80s, early 90s, and studied history down there, and then did a postgrad in business at Napier before moving back up. And I think at that stage, well, after studying history, I had the conclusion that I wasn't going to get very far doing anything business-wise, or I really didn't have a clue what I was doing. When I was at Edinburgh, the main thing for me at that time was actually playing rugby. That was my main passion, and I absolutely loved it. Of course, it was still an amateur sport in those days as well, but it was taking on a more and more of my life. But then when I moved back north, I suppose I decided I was going to have to do something a bit more serious. So that's the rugby dreams kind of died at that stage of thinking I was going to get any further.
Reality kicked in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So
you've got Brian MacGregor on the picture behind you on the wall.
If you can see him.
So are you a proud MacGregor? Did you celebrate your clan, your heritage when you were young, or is that something you've done as a family? Or?
Yeah, I remember as a very young boy, about 8 or 9 years old, being taken down to Rob Roy's grave, searching for his cave, getting all the stories from my dad. So yeah, we were very aware, and we'd always liked. I remember my dad talking about the "Despite Them" that was taken from the song by Sir Walter Scott, MacGregor Gathering. And while there's leaves in the forest and foam in the river, MacGregor, despite them, shall flourish wherever. And that little phrase is always stuck in my head. And that it's ended up becoming our kind of strapline for our motto for the pub, despite them. And we get asked every day, somebody comes into the bar and asks, what's the despite them? Who are you against? And it's a funny thing, because obviously the story was all about, the 100 years where the MacGregor clan were outlawed. That's obviously a historical fact. The despite them now, though, I think is a more general thing that's happened in the Highlands over the last, since Culloden, actually. The language has been kept down. The music has been banned. Fiddles have been burnt by the church. Everything that we had as Highland people has been really forced down and kept down, trying to make us part of Great Britain, which the Highlanders weren't, at that stage. And you can see why it happened, and you can see why Sir Walter Scott dreamt up this whole idea of the noble savage and tried to get the Highlanders brought back into North Britain, as we were referred to. But we were just different people up here in the Highlands. We spoke a different language, we played different music, we wore different clothes. It was a different area altogether. So I think that, despite them, has moved from just being the MacGregors to the fact that today, here we are with possibly more Gaelic speakers than there have been in 250 years. We've got more traditional musicians in probably 200 years, better pipers, fiddlers, Gaelic singers. It's incredible. The whole resurgence in traditional music in Scotland, I feel, has been sparked by what's happened in the Highlands and Islands.
Oh, that's all right. Yeah. So, were you a fiddler from a young age then? Was that something you started really young, or did you start
Yes,
with a different
I was.
instrument and move on to fiddling?
No, I don't ever remember actually ever wanting to play the fiddle. I've just it bizarrely Santa Claus presented it to me at the age of
Uh-huh.
7, I think I was, and
Oh, that's really young.
yeah, well, I was given a fiddle at the age of 7, but neither my mum, my dad, nor myself had the slightest idea that you had to put rosin on the bow to make a sound out of it. So for the first 6 weeks I had the thing, it made no sound at all, which was probably quite nice. To visit a man called Donald Riddell. He lived just outside of Inverness. He lived in a tiny wee croft way up in the hill at Breabach. There's definitely snow up there today. It's a really exposed area. He had been a pipe major in the Lovat Scouts during the Second World War. He was a fluent Gaelic speaker, a fluent Welsh speaker. He was a classical violinist, and he was a fiddle player. So I was taken up to him. And actually, I was just up there yesterday with my wife, and I just happened to say, we drove past the farm, and I remember the first lesson I went to, we had to trudge through the snow because the car wouldn't make the last bits up into his croft, and walked all the way there. When I saw the distance today or yesterday, it's only a matter of 100, 200 meters, but it felt like miles at the age of 7, trudging around in the snow up there. And we got there, and Donald Riddell was an amazing character. He had a huge shock of white hair on his head. He had massive, big, bushy eyebrows, and he had a cigarette surgically attached to his bottom lip the whole time. I think I knew him. So we went in, and my dad explained that I was wanting to learn the fiddle. And he had one look at me and went, too small, come back next year. And that was it. no, what are you doing here? Have a chat about it. It was just, no, you're too small, out you go. So I did come back a year later, and I started lessons with Donald. And he's, without doubt, one of the most influential musical characters in Scottish history in the last 200 years. The number of people he taught, from Duncan Chisholm to fellow Blazin Fiddle members, Ian McFarlane, to Adam Sutherland, who's played in so many bands across Scotland, Sarah Jane Summers. There must be at least 8 or 9 players who have gone on to play in the professional field these days that all came from Donald. And, he'd been teaching for 20 or 30 years in the Highlands before that as well. So he had a huge, huge influence.
Yeah, it's amazing. These people who are out there and you don't necessarily know about them, but as you say, so much influence on what comes next.
Oh, massively, massively. I mean, his whole, he'd been a classical teacher. He'd taught in Skye in the 1920s. The local church had preached against him and said, he was a disciple of the devil. And they told their kids not to go to his lessons. As I say, he was a pipe major in the Lovat Scouts during the Second World War. So he had that precision that was required that from the pipe major side of things, and he put it into fiddle playing and how we all played. And, it really was like being in the army. We wore our kilts when we had a performance. And when we weren't playing, the bows were put down at a certain angle. The fiddle was held at a certain angle. We put the fiddle up together. We all played. Everybody's bowing was exactly the same. And you had to have 3 hours worth of material memorized without a bit of sheet music in front of you before you were allowed to play them to the public. Which, when I tell people these days, they're like, what? That's mad. They went, well, that was just the deal. You had to have that amount of stuff memorized, all with the same bow strokes, all with the same grace notes, or you weren't allowed to play in public. He demanded a high standard. And I think people kind of shy away from that these days a little bit as to how, if you're going to make a good sound, how much work and how much dedication to practicing the right way. You can do 10,000 hours of practice, but if it's all practicing the wrong thing, it doesn't make, there's no point. I saw a quote about that from, what's his name, Lombardi, the American football coach and sports guru, who said, there's no point practicing unless you're practicing the right things. And as somebody pointed out, Spain had said they'd taken 1,000 penalty practice in the practices before they got knocked out of the World Cup. They'd taken 1,000 penalties, but they didn't say how many they'd scored. So it really does matter. Yes. Are you doing it right? Is the question. Yeah. So I think that goes for, it's not just music, it's sport, it's if you're making things, it's It's practice and doing things the right way.
And so then you established Blazin Fiddles 15 years ago, and so, well, from what I read, that was to showcase the different regional fiddle styles in Scotland. So can you explain to us what does that mean? What are the different styles? How would we recognise them? And have you got favourite ones?
Yeah, well, I mean, we started the band in 1998, so it's actually coming up for 25 years now. Will be this coming year. And when I was in America, I was doing a program at a fiddle school over there in San Francisco, and or outside of San Francisco in the Redwood Mountains, in the Redwood Forest, sorry. And an older fellow said to me when I was interviewing him about the music, he said, "Oh, it's a real shame all the Scottish fiddle styles have died. Scottish fiddle music's nearly dead." I was like, "No, it's not. It's really vibrant at the moment. It's just we're really terrible at letting people know what we've got." And I mentioned to the old fellow, I said, "Have you heard of Duncan Chisholm? Do you know Katrina MacDonald? Do you know?" And the guy says, "No, this is the problem. The problem is the music isn't there. The problem is we don't let anybody know about it. We're so caught up in our own little worlds that we forget there's a whole world out there that are actually interested in our music." So that was a kind of catalyst to getting it going. And I suppose when we talk about the regional styles, it's like your accent, so we used to, according to my fiddle teacher, Donald, he said at one stage there was 13 or 14 very distinct regional styles of fiddle playing. So if you went down to Fife, you would hear a Fife style, you would hear an Aberdeenshire style. We're much reduced now. We've basically got a Shetland style, an Orkney style. There's a West Highland coast, which has got a Gaelic element to it. There's definitely a Northeast. There's a Borders style and a Borders fiddle tradition as well. That's managed to I think it's been revitalized quite a bit in the more recent past. But that's what we're down to. There's no Edinburgh or Glasgow style or anything like that. They're just kind of homogenized Celtic sounds of all the people who have traveled there. But the sounds are like you speak, because you play the fiddle as if you were singing. That's what you're trying to do when you're playing traditional music. It's a voice. So you play with your voice. So for instance, I've got a great friend in Aberdeenshire who's called Paul Anderson, who's an amazing fiddle player. And he speaks Doric. When he's at full speed, it's hard to understand a word he's on about. And then you hear him on the fiddle and you think, oh my word, the way he plays is the way he speaks. And then I've got people over on the West Coast, Ian McFarlane, for instance. He's got a lovely, soft accent. He's very lyrical, and and it's a very different sound altogether. And it's just that's the way he plays the fiddle. And then in Shetland, you've got a different style there because of the influence of the Nordic players who came over. That Nordic fiddle tradition has been back and forth. They've also got a tradition that has come a little bit more from America because of the shortwave radio that influenced things in the 1950s. But you'll normally know if somebody comes from Shetland, Aberdeenshire, or the West Coast. So I could hear those distinct sounds. What was becoming fairly apparent to me in the 90s was that those styles were being homogenized into a generic Celtic fiddle sound. And I thought, it'd be better if we were alerted to the fact that there are these other sounds and people could delve into them. So that was really the idea of Blazin Fiddles and what we were wanting to do with it. Let people hear those accents.
Oh, it's so interesting. And so we have a bit of a commonality with our raising funds for the Doddie Foundation and the research into MND. So we obviously designed the Doddie tartan and thought I better wear it today. So what about your Doddie adventure then? How did that begin? And I know you've got a bit of an aspiration there for a Christmas #1. So
yes, absolutely. Well, the thing was, I was out cycling. I was doing Doddie Aid when would that have been? 2021. Yeah, I was out doing that, cycling around Loch Ness side. It was snowing, it was horrible and cold, and I fell off my bike. And I'd just written this tune on Hogmanay the year before, and it was a tune that felt, you know, it was kind of lockdown period as well. We were locked down that Hogmanay, and the tune felt quite aspirational. It felt positive, but it also felt a bit like a hymn of some sort, or anthemic anyway. And I couldn't think of a proper name for it at all. And when I fell off my bike, I came back, sat up back, and I went, "Why am I doing this? I should do what I'm, you know I can do, and call on the favors of people I know in the music world and try and put that all together." So that made a lot of sense. And as soon as I contacted the members of Blazin Fiddles, they were all like, "Absolutely, let's go for it." And then we just went round the likes of Phil Cunningham, Aly Bain, Duncan Chisholm, all the members of Skerryvore, Breabach, all of them, and everybody said no problem at all. Went over to America. We got Jerry Douglas playing on it, and he didn't know who Doddie was. And then he said, "Oh, I'll have a look." And he came back, and when he sent his video in, he had a picture of Doddie in his Scotland strip on the wall. He'd gone, "What a guy this is! He's unbelievable." So that was amazing to get somebody like Jerry Douglas. And then jokingly, one of Blazin Fiddles had said to me, "Oh, why don't you just try Nicola Benedetti?" I went, "Oh, all right, give it a go." And she came straight back and said, "Sounds great. I've just got to check with my record company. I would love to get involved." And after a little bit of toing and froing with the lawyers there, nothing too serious, she did the video and played on it as well. We had Sharon Shannon from Ireland. Her mother had died of MND as well, so she was really keen to get involved with it. So it really was a huge collaborative effort, and not just on the musician side of things, but the guys who did all the recording. I've got to mention Angus Lyon, who lives just outside of Biggar. He plays in Blazin Fiddles, but he took, it must be 35 different tracks from different people and managed to mix it all into something.
Oh, wow.
That made, and that's not an easy job. It really isn't. I mean, people were sending them through rough tracks that were made on their phones. Other people were using studios, and and then Julie Fowlis got involved with it as well, and Julie added some words to it, and so did Aly Bain, the whistle player. So there was vocals added into it. Then there was a little bit of percussion. Then there must be about 20 fiddles on it, as well as double bass, cello, concertina. There's just so many. It was the Scottish Folk Orchestra, really. We couldn't have asked for a better crowd to get involved with it. And we got it together. We released it in March, I think it was, and it got to number 9 in the UK charts just for a week. It was one place above Boney M, which I haven't looked at the charts in a long time, so I got a bit of a shock to see that Boney M were back in the charts. But there we go.
Yeah, I was going to say.
So yeah, that was it. And many years ago, I was lucky enough to get into a squad, Scotland student squads with Doddie, and I had a sore neck just looking up to him all the time. I never got onto the pitch. I was a substitute in the 3 international games that I was at, but he was just, I mean, he was a large man, but he was larger than that in life. He was just an incredible force of nature and energy.
So we need to all go and download so that then we can take it back to, got to beat position 9 then.
Yeah, I mean, even if we got to number 5, that would be quite apt. But it
I was going to say.
Yeah, the further it goes, the more we can raise, and it just gets people knowing about MND. I mean, that's the amazing thing. I was talking to somebody earlier about it today. We don't know if it's more prevalent or we're just finding out more people have it. I think that's a difficult thing. I don't know what the answer to that is, but I think people are far more aware of it, and seeing how brutal it is to people as well. So I think we desperately need to try and find some sort of cure for it.
Yes, no, it's very close to our hearts. So we'll get those downloads happening. So as well as all of this, you present Travelling Folk on BBC Radio Scotland. You're still doing that? Yeah.
No, I stopped doing that in March this year. We opened a hotel up on the North Coast 500. So between trying to get the hotel the pub. We've got a wedding venue, Blazin Fiddles stuff. It was just, and I just really, okay, I done it for 10 years, and to be honest, that's plenty to do anything.
So what kind of audience then does that attract? Is that a UK audience or a worldwide audience, or what?
What's that, the travelling folk programme?
Yeah.
Predominantly UK, because it's quite difficult to. There's all these. What do you call it? There are barriers to it being transported across the world, so the majority of it is, I think, UK wide. But I've been looking at trying to possibly do a podcast which would highlight more Scottish music to a worldwide audience, because it seems to be that the BBC is tied up in knots trying to license everything out there. Whereas podcasts, it's like the old days of pirate radio. Just get it out there, and people can listen to it. So that's the plan for possibly sometime next year.
We'll look out for that. So at the beginning, I said how multi-talented you were, and you've just said about you've got your craft beer business and MacGregor Bars, and your wedding and festival venue. So what inspired all of that then? What made you want to do that?
Part of it was just opportunity, to be quite honest. There were a couple of things, like Bogbain being a wedding venue. We started off as a kids' adventure centre. That didn't work. It was horrible. I can advise people, don't get involved with other people's kids and try and look after them, and not if you want a nice life. But when we had that, a prospective bride and groom, unbeknownst to me, they walked in and said the venue was exactly what they were looking for their wedding, and went, oh, okay. So it was kind of by happenstance that we ended up doing that. It's grown arms and legs, though, but that whole building has changed. My wife's completely redeveloped that whole side of it, and then she's done an amazing job of that. I do think when we looked at MacGregor's as a bar in the town centre, again, that was a property my dad had in the town centre that nobody would take. It was lying empty for 4 years, like so many town centre places. It was a struggle. And when I told him I was wanting to open a craft beer bar, he said, don't be so stupid. Nobody goes to bars anymore. Well, if we marry culture, music, really good food all together, we'll maybe get them in, especially if they're visitors. That's and I think we've been very true to what the beliefs were at the beginning, which were celebrating Scottish history, Scottish beer, Scottish spirits, and Scottish food, and trying to tie them all together and putting on events. And every day is a festival. That's the idea when you go in there, or an adventure in taste, because there's so many great producers of spirits and beers in Scotland, and a lot of the time you go into bars and you're presented with exactly the same kind of big ones from the big brewers, and you don't get a choice. You don't get a chance to try these things out. So that's certainly been one of the key things for us.
Fantastic. Sounds good. So where are we to come and visit you then?
We are in Inverness. Yeah, we're on Academy Street. We're actually at the base end of Academy Street and Church Street. If you walk up from the base end of them, that's you walking straight up to the castle. So it's about 200 metres away from the train station and about 150 metres away from the bus station. So it's very easy to find. We're just about 20 metres away from the river as well.
Fantastic. Put that on the list of things to do. Well, thank you very much for joining us. It's very much appreciated. I've really enjoyed learning more about fiddling. It's not something I have any expertise in, so it's really interesting. And we'll make sure to promote your Doddie's Dream.
Well done on the tartan. It's absolutely brilliant. I've got my my cycling vest in the tartan colours. So yeah, good. It's funny, we see them all around the Highlands. People wearing them when they're cycling about. So well done on you doing that.
No, it was good fun. Well, you know what Doddie's like, it's good fun. So we had a lot of fun designing it with all his mad ideas on what we should do. But yes, Emily, who's in house here, is good at taking mad ideas and making them beautiful. So
yeah. Very nice.
A great course.